Hi, YouTube. Okay, YouTube, part 3 of our adoption journey. And this is my favorite part because this is the part where we became a family. Part 2 was kind of boring, drawn out, all the work and hassle.
So let's get to the meat of it.
So part 3 opens up with, we've been approved! So we got approved. We basically got our authority from the state of California to be adoptive parents. And I cannot tell you how exciting that is. When we got that official call from Denise saying that we were qualified to be adoptive parents, we were jazzed. So what comes after you get adopted, you become adoptive parents, they take all that background, all that information they learned about you, and they put it in this little bitty, it's probably about 7 or 8 pages, form, which basically talks about you. It's your profile as a couple, your strengths, your weaknesses, and they send this profile out to all the county and private adoption agencies in the state of California where we live. And it basically tells those social workers about you as a family and allows them to see maybe if there's any potential fits for you. That's our profile from our social worker, and this was sent out to all the different state agencies in California. So once that happens, once you have your profile, I'll let you talk about what happened next.
Well, basically it becomes a big matchmaking game. This goes out with your picture, and just like there are big books full of kids, there's also profiles full of adoptive parents.
And he's not kidding about big books full of kids.
And it becomes a big matchmaking game between the social workers that represent the kids looking for suitable parents, plus us as parents then going to TLC. They sat us down in a big conference room at a huge meeting table and filled that table up with books full of kids.
You know, and that to me was the most surprising part, I think, of the whole adoption process is we went to our adoption agency and there is a room full of shelves, full of binders. And at first you thought, okay, that's past families that have adopted, or these are, you know, paperwork. I mean, you saw how much paper we had to fill out, and I just assumed that it was paperwork full of families. But it's kids. I mean, it's kids in the state of California that need homes. And it is amazing when you sit down and you're thinking, okay, well, how long are we going to be waiting for a potential match? Are we going to be waiting 6 months? Are we going to be waiting a year until we actually find the kids that are supposed to be our family? And
then when you see the huge volume, I mean, you go in there thinking, I want to build my family.
Yeah.
But then you see all those kids and you start to flip through the pages. And you start to feel like you're on the last lifeboat of the Titanic and you can only save one more person.
Every single kid in that binder has a profile. And I mean, there are just like tons and tons and tons of them. Not a lot of babies, because sadly, as it is in California, probably mostly around the country, most, I don't want to say heterosexual. Should we say heterosexual?
Babies are in high demand. They go quickly.
People want babies, and they don't want kids that are over the age of 3. They don't want kids with any type of mental or physical disabilities.
Sibling groups are hard to adopt.
And there are sibling groups with 5 or 6 kids that are stuck in foster cares or group homes. So we sat down and we were going through these binders. And here's the funny thing. I found 2 kids that I just, for some reason, just in my mind clicked. And I remember seeing them together, and I remember seeing a picture of Daniel and a picture of Selena. And Daniel was the funniest looking little boy, but he had this big grin on his face. I mean, half of his face was missing. You know, his jaw was gone. He had a cleft palate, but he had something about his eyes, something about his smile. And then there was Selena. And she looked like the baby from the Flintstones. She looked like little pebbles. She had a little
top knot about this tall.
A bow that shot up. And she just had the most bizarre look on her face, like, why are you taking a picture of me? And those 2 in their profile just stood out to me. And I remember we were taking profiles and we were sticking them on the side of kids that we might potentially want to meet or be interested in. And I remember those kids sat in my mind. Now, he had a different experience.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when you're faced with the enormity of that many kids, I wasn't ready to pick one group out of the bunch yet.
Well, and you got scared.
It was really hard, yeah. I was resistant to Daniel and Selena at first.
Yeah. Daniel's profile was kind of scary, and I want to read, you know, when you get a kid's profile, some of the things that they talked about in his profile, and it was scary. He had significant health concerns, golden genetic syndrome, golden heart syndrome. So if you ever get a chance, watch our video on that. It's very important. Asthma. He uses a Poma quart twice a day. Needs appointment with his doctor. Cleft palate had surgically been repaired in 2001, but he needs most appointments with craniofacial clinics to follow up on surgeries. Underdeveloped left lung, complex heart problems, they called him developmentally delayed, which means psychologically they were concerned about some of his issues. GI reflux, which means basically when he ate, he had a hard time keeping it down. And vertebral anomalies.
Vertebral anomalies.
Which I don't know what that is.
Well, basically, when it's a sad fact of the system that the worse you make a kid sound in the system, the more help they get.
Well, not only that. Now, Daniel had a lot of problems. When he first came to us, he had an asthma machine. He had a lot of surgeries when he was a little baby. I mean, that kid, his first couple of years of life.
When he came to live with us, he didn't need that asthma machine. He wasn't using it. He had outgrown it long
took
ago.
him off that asthma machine.
Because
we worked with him, and we took care of him, and we took him. You've got to give yourself a little bit of credit, because he came to us dependent on a whole lot of things that he was used to using, and he didn't need those things. They were comfort things. They were crutches for him to hold on to something that he's been used to since he was a baby.
And by the people who made him feel
yeah,
like he needed
and the
to have
people
those things.
his foster parents wanted him to look really bad. And the reason why they wanted Daniel to look really bad, and they made all kinds of claims in his profile about how he would smear poop on the walls and how he wasn't very good with other kids, and he just wasn't, because they wanted to adopt his sister. The people that Daniel and Selena lived with, his foster parents, wanted to adopt Selena. They wanted to be her parents.
So, some backstory for that, though.
Yeah.
At the time that Selena was born, Daniel and Selena's biological mom had already lost all parental rights to any children she would ever produce again.
Yeah.
So the only parent that still had any claim to them was Daniel's father, who had already been deported to Mexico.
Who was a migrant worker here in California.
And is completely off the radar. Nobody can find him.
Yeah.
So Selena is already legally ready for adoption.
She has no biological father on record.
Daniel is not.
Yeah. The only father that was known for Selena was a Filipino man. So Selena is Mexican and Filipino. Daniel is Mexican completely. And their mother is their relationship together. They have the same mother.
So shooting back, though, their situation in their foster family was Selena was available for adoption, and they were living with a family that was willing to adopt Selena but did not want to adopt Daniel.
And that's really important. Okay, so we're off track a little bit. Let's get back on track. So we passed them up, and we're waiting. We sent out our feelers all around on kids that we were interested in. And then our social worker got a very interesting letter from a social worker who represented Daniel and Selena. And what was her name? Janet. And she saw our profile, and something in her clicked. And she wrote our social worker a really nice letter about how Daniel had already lost one sibling to another adoption, a little brother, who was taken away at the age of 12 months. And Selena had just hit 12 months, and she was now about to be adopted out, away from Daniel, by the foster family that was taking care of them. Now, she wrote this letter about how great these kids are. She basically was fighting for them to stay together, as siblings said. She saw the bond between the two. And
she's an example of an awesome state adoption worker.
Who knew that Daniel had already been through too much in his little life at 5 years old, that the fact that he was going to lose his sister was just too much for her to bear. And so she wrote us a letter.
So at that point, I had to pretty much acknowledge that it was destiny, and this is where we were meant to go.
And he was still a little uneasy, and I just knew in my heart before I even met those kids that those were my kids. I already started to relate. You got to be very careful, because sometimes you start to think about kids in a certain way, and if it doesn't happen, it's hard. It can be really tough.
Yeah.
So we did our drive. We drove and
to Sacramento, where one of the things you do as an adoptive parent is you meet in a neutral location, and they have special people who provide a neutral location basically for you to meet with the kids.
And the way that it's supposed to work is you meet the kids several times over like a month period to make sure these are the kids that you want to take into your home. So it's just not, you just don't go there, pick them up and take them home. Right. You're supposed to meet them, spend time with them several times and make sure that these are the kids that are meant to be yours. And so we show up at this thing, and I'll let you start with your impressions about Daniel.
Well,
it was amazing.
Well, Daniel reminded me a lot of myself as a kid. I bonded with Daniel right off the get-go, and And Jay and Selena sat and ate chicken nuggets from McDonald's, and they were buddies right from the start.
But here's the amazing thing, and I know he's being kind of vague about it. Daniel and Bryan connected instantly. The two of them instantly sat and played toys and read books and talked about Star Wars. And Daniel loved Anakin Skywalker. Instantly, Bryan was hooked. He was so leery of Daniel before we went.
Small. I mean, you don't realize seeing Daniel now. When he was 5.5 years old, he was just this cute little guy, about yay big, with his bowl haircut. Yeah. And, your heart broke the first time you saw him.
Bryan and Daniel were instantly buddies.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't a father yet, but he was definitely Daniel's best friend. And me and Selena, I mean, how could you not love this little fat baby who sat there and giggled whenever you dipped, a chicken nugget and ketchup and fed it to her. She'd giggle, or a French fry. Yeah. I mean, she was just incredible.
And her profile said that she was not an affectionate baby. Because
she was very affectionate. She's a little leery of you at first, though. You guys, because you're so quiet.
Yeah.
I was doing the stuff, and she'd laugh, and she'd, Bryan's a little bit more shy.
So we read books, and we played with toys, and we went to McDonald's and brought the McDonald's back to the place, and we all ate together.
Then we drove back to Santa Rosa, and as we were driving back, the social worker got a call from the social worker that was representing the kids. And she basically said that the foster mother realized that now she's not going to be able to adopt Selena, that she wanted the kids, Daniel and Selena, out of her house that day.
Mm-hmm. She was divorcing her husband at the time.
Yeah.
Since she realized that she wasn't going to...
She didn't realize. She knew that she wasn't able to adopt Selena, so she wanted both of the kids out of her house.
Yeah.
She gave us 24 hours to get the kids out of her house. Now this became kind of complicated because Selena, we were able to take Selena home as a foster child because she was already opened up for adoption. Mm-hmm. But Daniel, they hadn't gotten permission yet from the father to release him to be an adopted child.
Because he had been deported to Mexico and nobody could find him.
Yeah. So the next day we drove back to Sacramento and we met the kids again. We actually had a kind of a weird experience with the foster mother. She realized, because she wasn't there on the first meeting, that it was going to be two fathers.
Yeah.
And she flipped out and she screamed, "My daughter isn't going to have a mother." And I remember that, she ended up, yelling at the social worker in front of the kids, and she ran out of the room. Now, I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a big softie. And I'm a provider, and I'm one of those people who, and I just spit on you. I need to fix things. That's how I am as an individual. I have to fix stuff. I chased her out the room. I left Bryan with the kids, and I followed this woman out into the driveway. And I spent probably, what do you think, about 45 minutes to an hour out there talking to her, reassuring her who we are as individuals, and that the kids would be taken care of, and that we're truly going in this with big hearts, and that Bryan makes a good mom from time to time. It's a joke. He's so not a mom figure, unfortunately. But we talked, and I reassured her that we would give these kids a great home, full of love, and we'd write her and we'd send her pictures. And it was I think she went away from that conversation feeling much better about the circumstances. Mm-hmm. And because she had spent pretty much Selena's whole life with her, from being born to being 12 months old. So I think whether she was willing to adopt Daniel or not, she had love for these kids.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I didn't want to go away in a bad way. Mm-hmm. She did provide the first year of life for our daughter and a year of life for our son.
Well, regardless of the circumstances of what was going on now, she had treated them very well while they were living with her. And Daniel was, in terms of his education, was way beyond where he should be.
For kindergarten.
Yeah.
So, we basically...
So at that point, we took Selena home with us, and Daniel was not able to go because he wasn't free for adoption yet. They still had to keep trying to contact his father, so that meant Daniel still had to be out of his current foster house where he had connections with his other foster siblings.
So they basically moved him over to another foster home,
which was not a good situation.
And on that was probably the hardest day of our whole experience, because what happened was we took Selena home. And we had to leave poor little Daniel there. Yeah. And Daniel was crying, and Bryan was crying, and we spent an hour trying to convince Daniel this was temporary, that as soon as they signed off on the paperwork, we would come get him and take him home with us, that every weekend from that day on, we would be visiting him in Sacramento, which we did. We drove up to Sacramento several times to see Daniel and visit with him. And every meeting that we drove to Sacramento, this one would be crying all the way home.
Anybody who's
You know.
ever been through a divorce and a custody battle with parents and kids who knows
Yeah.
how painful that is, this felt exactly like that.
And I think the social workers realized that, we needed to move this further. We needed to move it faster because Bryan was emotionally being torn apart, and poor Daniel was emotionally being torn apart.
And he was being physically abused by other foster kids in the house that he was in.
Yeah, which wasn't a good situation. So, we would go visit him and he would say, when can I come home with you guys? Are you guys going to take me home? And it was sad. It was hard.
Yeah.
So we pushed it and we got the court to release Daniel to us early before he was actually releasable. And he came home with us. And that was a really great day. We got to have Daniel Selena in the same home with us. And I can't, explain to you that first year. I took 3 months off of my job in order to spend with my family.
Yep, and that was nice to have him home for that time.
And 3 months of the four of us together was incredible.
And there were when the kids came to live with us, there were some real adjustments you have to make of going from, when you're a parent, when you have a baby, that you go through this slow learning curve.
Yeah.
When you have a kid
5-year-old
dropped
and a
in,
12-month-old. Yeah.
you go from 0 to parent in no time flat.
And we had to put 2 bedrooms together in a matter of, what?
A couple of days. Yeah.
It was amazing. We had to go shop. We had to buy cribs and diapers and clothes. I mean, they really only come with a box.
Yeah.
And I'm going to link a video here of a guy who was adopted, and he talks about his box. And that box is really, we've kept Selena's box and Daniel's boxes because I think it's important that they know their history.
They had some clothes, they had some toys, and that's all they had in the world. They have a binder that has their history in it. There's no family photos, that's it. That's all they come with.
So we're going to wrap this video up because we don't want it to go too long. But we know there's a bunch of questions out there. So whatever questions you have, whether you send them to us in video format or written format, the last video of this series is going to be answering those questions because we know you have a lot. And there's a bunch that we couldn't fit in these 3 videos. But that was pretty much our adoption story.
Well, there is one more part of it, and that's once the kids were placed with us, they had to be with us, free. Once the parental rights have been terminated, the kids have to live with us for 6 months before we can legally go through the finalization of the adoption.
And during that process, which that's probably a good thing to bring up, during that process, a social worker comes every week and does a study for the week, and they talk to the kids, and they talk to you, and they see how things are going. And this is what that looks like. It's they do this every week. They fill this form out, and they basically functional and emotional. They want to see what's happening. Peer relationships, the foster family, how we are all doing together. Cross-cultural issues, what are we doing to encourage the kids' Latino heritage? Basically, medical, dental, are we taking the kids to their doctor's appointments? Are we following up with their dental appointments? It's just the progress, what's happening in the courts, what's happening with all the systems, and there's actually a little rating system back here on the back where our social worker basically gives us points based on how things are working out.
Yeah.
And the court gets these every week, and they get to take a chance to look at them. The social worker in Sacramento got to take a look at them to make sure that everything's good. She would come up once a month to visit our home.
Our social worker would be there, every other week?
No, every week at first. The first couple months was every week.
And then the kid's social worker
would come every once
well.
a month. And once that's all done, at the end of the 6-month period, all these reports are submitted to the court system, and they basically decide whether the kids will be adopted or not.
Right. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.